Today is July 4th, and Donald Trump has signed into law the big, beautiful bill. It passed the House, passed the Senate, and went to Donald Trump's desk for him to sign. It is now going into effect. Now, the big, beautiful bill expands across all sorts of federal government agencies and programs, but I really want to hone in and talk about electric vehicles and how this affects electric vehicle owners, buyers, infrastructures, and even bigger EV automakers, because this might affect them a lot more than you think. This is a lot to go over, so sit down, grab some popcorn, and let's talk about this big, beautiful bill. Now, I have combed through the big, beautiful bill looking for things that specifically target electric vehicles, electric vehicle companies, and electric vehicle infrastructure. But this big, beautiful bill also goes after solar, wind, even hydrogen vehicles. While those are sustainable initiatives, I'm just going to talk about electric vehicles because that is really our main focus here on this channel and is really something that I understand. However, Sawyer Merritt on Twitter, he actually has an amazing thread going over everything within, the sustainability, renewable energy sector that is being affected by the big, beautiful bill. But off the top, the termination of the clean vehicle tax credit, the Inflation Reduction Act tax credit. That's $7,500 that you can get off an electric vehicle. Now, this was introduced by Joe Biden. What it did is, depending on how much of the battery and vehicle was produced in the United States, your vehicle may be eligible to get $7,500 off. And then for all electric vehicles, there's a loophole. If you leased, regardless of how or where the vehicle was made, you could get that $7,500. And I would say the Inflation Reduction Act is probably one of the bigger reasons why we saw Hyundai Kia open up a new EV factory, vehicle factory, that has a assembly for electric vehicles in Georgia. And I'm going to reiterate this in the video. A lot of what the Inflation Reduction Act introduced helped incentivize automakers to invest in American manufacturing. Point being, the Inflation Reduction Act, the $7,500 tax credit, is going away. September 30th. October 1st, no vehicle, no EV will be eligible for the $7,500 tax credit, leased or bought, regardless of where its components are made. That also goes with the $4,000 used EV credit. It was up to $4,000, I believe, like 25% of the value of the vehicle, something like that, up to $4,000. That is also going away. And so these incentives to buying a new or used EV are pretty much out the window. And this, I think, affects a lot more than you guys might actually understand. We have a ton of vehicles that ride on the $7,500 tax credit. The reason I'm sitting in my Rivian is because of the $7,500 tax credit. The Rivian R2, a big part of Rivian being able to sell that is going to be the $7,500 tax credit. The Model 3, the Model Y, the Equinox EV, an EV that I think genuinely is amazing all around, and GM sells a ton of those for just above $25,000 new, 300 miles of range, because of the $7,500 tax credit. Then you have a company like Slate, where the vehicle starting price, and when I talked to Slate's people, they were rest assured that they're going to get the $7,500 tax credit is here to stay. Slate, it's going to start at $27,500. The $7,500 tax credit would help it bring it to that starting price that everyone's looking for. So this pretty much has killed the bread and butter, the baseline of what Slate is being built on. And all of the other companies that are riding on the incentives to sell more vehicles. And I think it's just, I don't want it to seem like I'm being political here, but just from a perspective of someone that's interested in electrification. Now, I think almost in pure capitalism, honestly, I'd be fine with China coming in here and selling all their EVs. But I think governments incentivizing, the purchase of certain goods can be a cause for some issue. But why would I be against, a couple tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars, a year, being spent on investing in people buying electric vehicles? I don't really think that's that much of an issue, especially when other countries um, and continents as a whole support electrification with incentives, not only at the consumer level, but at the manufacturing level to incentivize the price, decreasing the price of electric vehicles for people to buy. And so it's going to be interesting to see how this affects demand, if we're going to see a stunt in demand, if at all, by the removal of the $7,500 tax credit, but that is going away. Also, the clean commercial energy tax credit. I didn't know this was a thing, but for commercial vehicles that were 14,000 pounds or more, they got $40,000 off. And so, of course, this affects fleet operators and, again, those that have EVs more than 14,000 pounds for their commercial businesses, delivery services. This is going to affect them. They will no longer be able to claim that credit. And that, again, ends September 30th, October 1st. That's all ending. So the end of quarter 3. I also think about, for companies like Amazon that are driving Rivian EDVs, I'm not sure if, Amazon claims the $7,500, no, sorry, the $40,000 tax credit for their EDVs, or if, UPS or DHL or any of these delivery companies, there's a shop near me that in Tallahassee, I'm not in Tallahassee right now, that drives a Bright Drop Zevo van, and that's probably more than 14,000 pounds. They probably claim that $40,000 credit. That goes away now. So at a consumer and commercial level, that is gone. So that kind of sucks. Also, the termination of the alternative fuel refueling property credit. This offers up to $100,000 per charger installation for commercial sites, and up to 30% up to $1,000 for home owners. This helps install level 2 chargers at apartments and public locations. Imagine like parks, malls, where people will be publicly parking, and DC fast charging sites. That will end next year, 2026, June 30th. So the end of quarter 2, 2026. It's going to be quite some time. Automakers, those that are installing infrastructure are going to have some time to be able to continue finishing their sites, to be able to, get their money. A lot of companies were building sites on the basis that they would be getting funding. And so that'll be ending June 30th, 2026, which is smart, because if you end it early, right, many charging companies, property owners, they'll probably delay or just cancel entirely their infrastructure installments. And that just hinders EV infrastructure as a whole. Again, I wonder how this affects consumers. You have something that incentivizes property owners to install public charging at the level 2 AC or DC, especially in rural areas. And now that's not going to be a thing anymore. And so I wonder how that affects those who are in areas where maybe charging isn't as great. Now, going back on the $7,500 tax credit that new EV vehicles get, there was also some wording that was changed, Section 45D, that changes the foreign entities of concern. So for instance, right, as you mentioned, if a battery, some of the materials in the batteries, that nickel, the manganese, the cobalt, whatever, is sourced from the United States or any of its trade partners, South Korea, Japan, Italy, other companies, right, then it is able to secure that $7,500 funding. However, the wording is now broadened to, credits can be revoked if the buyer or seller receives material assistance from a foreign entity. So let's say this South Korea is a trade partner to the United States. And let's say this, SK Energy, which produces batteries, has some sort of supplier in China. Well, that can be, major to the production of these batteries for Hyundai Kia. Well, now Hyundai Kia vehicles already don't. Well, some do, but the point being, it broadens the language. And so if South Korea this company is receiving assistance from a Chinese supplier, now, boom, you don't get the credit either. So while the credit is still ending September 30th, it already kind of cancels out some companies that may be getting, some of the materials from a US supplier that could be using Chinese or Russian parts or North Korean or Iranian parts. Those are countries that the United States has on its entities of concerns. You're not allowed to have any materials in the vehicle concerning that to get that $75 credit. And so that pretty much just boom. So even if, we'll find out in the future what other, what companies or cars or models this affects, if we ever do. But this kind of like nips that in the butt now for those that may be trying to get funding then. And it goes a little deeper than that. It isn't just materials. If this company is getting assistance in the term of financing or, subsidies, I'm reading from a list here, if they have a ownership from a Chinese firm or a joint venture, which every single company, US company that sells in China has a joint venture. That's something that China has kind of like forced companies to do. You have to have a joint venture with a Chinese company. And let's say they're taking a part from China and then having that made in a vehicle that gets that $7,500 tax credit. Again, I don't know what vehicle that would be, but just for example, that would pretty much cancel that vehicle out. Tesla's the only company in China that doesn't have a joint venture, but Ford, Volkswagen, Stellantis, GM, all of them have joint ventures. Honda, Toyota. You get it. So that immediately, like, this isn't like a date thing. It immediately ends all vehicles that have any sort of connection to foreign entities of concern. Now, I should mention that is not NEVI funding. This is a whole different incentive. As I've read, this bill doesn't include anything about NEVI funding. NEVI funding came from an Infrastructure and Jobs Act. Most of this that's being rescinded comes from the Inflation Reduction Act. And so it seems NEVI is fine for now. If I'm wrong, we will probably make a whole nother video about this in the future. I'm just here in my Rivian traveling. I want to get this out to you guys as soon as possible so you can have an idea of what's actually kind of going into effect as we know it. This also phases out the advanced manufacturing production credit. So businesses, corporations, manufacturing facilities can get a credit by purchasing equipment used for the production of material for renewable energy. So think components in electric vehicles, solar panels, wind turbines, stuff like this, inverters, like all of this. There is a credit used for some of the machinery that's being bought to build these things. And that is being cut out. This affects everyone from Tesla. Tesla, I think specifically, right? They just launched their LFP battery factory. They have, Panasonic. This affects SK On, LG, GM Ultium, where they are likely, I don't know the taxes of these companies, but where they're likely taking credits for some of the equipment being bought to help build a lot of the machinery that goes into electric vehicles, into batteries, into their motors. And so that credit pretty much goes out the window. I find it funny because you have a company a country like China, where originally China was heavily incentivizing the cars. Things like actually taking off things off the top of the price for the consumer, or giving you a different license plate that you could get quicker, because you have to buy the license plate separate in China, and it's hard to get a license plate, but if you buy an EV, you can get the license plate immediately. It made people by electric vehicles. And then now that seemed to kind of phase out of China. Now China is on the back end incentivizing auto manufacturers. So aluminum, steel, a lot of critical materials that go in batteries, that is being subsidized. It is being made cheaper so these companies can make a cheaper vehicle. And instead of just taking off the top of the consumer, you take it off from the company, and that allows them to compete more, right? Try to sell a cheaper product, get a product out quicker, have a product that's competitive because the consumer isn't getting a price difference. They're not getting a coupon that says take $7,500 off. They're just getting the price. And so you have a country like China pretty much incentivizing and subsidizing manufacturing and corporations so that they expand and make things cheaper for consumers. And then you have the United States, which is removing these companies from taking incentives to help their renewable energy manufacturing. And so this is something that's also been removed, which, again, I mean, here's the thing. I don't want to seem like I'm being political about it, just trying to be objective as an electric vehicle fan, who's a fan from the actual user experience to the business side of things, to the manufacturing side of things. And none of this long-term benefits EV companies or owners. At least that's what I think. I'm curious to know what you guys think down in the comments below. Hopefully, again, I'm not coming off too politically strong. Now, let's close this out to talk about ZEV credits, or carbon credits, greenhouse gas credits from the California Air Resources Board, the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, and the NHTSA. All right, each of these have their own set of standards when it comes to emissions that a vehicle produces. Now, ZEV credits aren't going away anywhere. ZEV credits are really at a state level, right? It is California's emission standard, and other states, I think about 17 other states, also use this emission standard, I think from Washington and New York and I believe Oregon. And so there's a bunch of other states that use it, but that is at a state level. Then you have the EPA with the greenhouse gas carbon credits. When a automaker company emits less emissions than they're allowed to, they get these greenhouse gas carbon credits. Now, they can use these, kind of bank them for the future for maybe a year, or when they release a product that really isn't as efficient and is making them go past that minimum, that standard that they're allowed to emit, or they can sell them to other companies that might not be, meeting those standards. So if you're a Tesla, for instance, and you are emitting way less than Ford, Stellantis, GM, you have so many credits, you're able to sell those to Stellantis and Ford and GM and other automakers. So they're able to, kind of make up for some of the emissions that they're emitting more than for the standard that has been set. Hopefully that's making sense. Then it comes to the NHTSA, federal government, okay? They have the corporate average fuel economy standard, CAF, kind of like cafe, and they charge fines for every vehicle sold that doesn't meet a certain mile per gallon. So every 0.1 mile per gallon, it was like $5 per unit per vehicle per 0.1 mile per gallon that they exceeded the emissions for the standard of this vehicle. Now, this is actually can be a good thing, because removing some of these penalties means that a lot of these automakers don't have to make as big of cars, because big cars are less efficient, to kind of a loophole to work around not having to make as efficient vehicles. These automakers are just making bigger vehicles. Bigger vehicles are automatically known to be less efficient, and so they don't end up having to meet these set of efficiency standards. And this is why, again, in the United States, we're full of sedans and trucks, and things are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. With this removed, we may see smaller and smaller cars, because you can have a sedan with, even though it's smaller and technically might be as efficient, it just isn't efficient enough for the NHTSA, and so they'll penalize for you. They'll penalize that on you. Now that is being removed. Currently, I believe the federal government has it at $5, but the NHTSA had it at like $14 or $15. But again, it's just at zero now. And so now with this big, beautiful bill, there won't be a penalty, a civil penalty, if you are emitting more emissions than, the miles per gallon efficient. Your vehicle isn't as efficient. Your fleet isn't as efficient as it should be. And so I think we're already seeing automakers react to this. Like Mercedes was already testing like a new V10 engine. Stellantis has already come out and said they're bringing back the Hemi. So clearly, right, these automakers are like, oh, we can work on some of our engines again and things that are less efficient technically. And this is great. They get to work on more internal combustion engine vehicles, but that means they're going to invest less in EVs. Now, there's actually a lot more that I could probably go into the nitty gritty. I mean, this big, beautiful bill is so many pages. And I just wanted to touch on some of the bigger points. But we're not getting an EV annual fee, so don't expect anything. Don't expect a letter in the mail because you own an EV. You got to pay more for the roads or something. You got to pay some sort of annual fee. The basis for this, right, that when this was introduced, was that EVs cause more damage to the road, but statistically that is just not true. A semi truck, I think it was like it causes 18,000 times more damage than a 6,000 pound vehicle. And we know most EVs aren't even 6,000 pounds. A lot of EVs are the same, if not a little lighter, than their internal combustion engine counterparts. The Tesla Model 3 is lighter than the BMW 3 Series. And so, they're trying to make it seem like EVs are damaging the roads and they're not paying for the roads, which is kind of true because gas vehicles, embedded in the amount that you pay for fuel, there is a gas tax. And that helps to pay for the roads. EVs don't pay that. And so that this annual fee, what seems to try to recuperate that. But when you do the math, it doesn't equal like $250, something like that. It really equals like $50. So point is, there's nothing like that here. Also in here, like it removes interest for removes interest for auto loans for vehicles that were made in the United States. So like your Tesla, you can buy a Tesla Model 3. It was made in the United States. You're not paying taxes on the auto loan. Simultaneously, you can still claim the $7,500 tax credit until the end of September. So you can tax-free loan and $7,500 tax credit. You can claim that by September 30th. But there's a lot more. Again, as things develop, change, and more things are kind of found and interpreted better, I'll make another video on that. But I want to touch on some of those big points, that being, right, the vehicle credits, particularly buying or leasing buying a new used EV, those carbon ZEV credits, those emission standards, as well as how this affects, right, commercial businesses. So let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. Again, this has nothing to do with the big, beautiful bill as a whole, really just how it affects electrification and electric vehicle infrastructure. Because there's a lot of parts in this bill that I think can be good. But yeah, it's a pretty controversial bill. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. This is Out of Spec Bits. My name is Isaiah, and I'll see you guys in the next one.